I think identity is like fake, and the concept of self is a trap. And I was like kind of talking about this with someone earlier, sort of tangentially related. And I took a shower and I thought about it and I thought a lot about it. And I was like, I should like talk this out because I think about it a lot of like how this fixation on like who am I and like, what is the real me never goes anywhere good. And it's kind of like the bane of modern society that like ruins people's happiness to just sit around thinking about who they are and thinking they're going to get something from that. Right? It's one thing to just think about it, but this idea that there's some kind of like spiritual fulfillment in it, like it's going to give you something, that really frustrates me. And I think it's something a lot of people fall into, and it is basically causal to like personal misery and like constant emotional distress. Um, I'm also gonna like sit right here. I'm sorry if my face being huge is kind of annoying, but I hate having to like I'd love to sit here, but I have to like project my voice more. I think this would be better. At some point I'm gonna get like a microphone, probably maybe. Um, I can buy one now. I have enough money to buy like a cheap one. But I don't like film myself ever or use my microphone ever, like very rarely, so I'm kind of like on the fence. Like, if I get like a really cheap one, then I guess that's worth it, and then I can like sit in a more normal position. Um, but I hate like having to shout and like I live with other people, and it's really not it for me to sit back there and be really really loud because then I like never want to film anything. So it's kind of a cycle where my not having a mic means I film less. I make, I'll like think of something I want to say and then I like won't say it because I don't have a microphone and other people are around and I don't want to like be shouting and have everyone in the house hear everything that I'm saying. So that's the concept for today. So what set me off today? So my friend came across like this spam article basically of like 5 things you're doing that are secretly making you sin. Um, and he sent a couple screenshots and we were just making fun of it and whatever. But the first one was being satisfied. And first of all, it was kind of logically flawed because its conclusion was like, if you're satisfied, like if you get into a routine in life, that'll make you bored and then you'll fall into sin, which is like, doesn't really sound like you're satisfied, does it? But it kind of mixed those two things, and it was basically like being satisfied. You should always be ambitious, like that's a virtue, and it kind of like set me off a little bit because you know, to me, being satisfied is like the goal of life, right? I want to have a routine where I'm happy. I want to be able to just live my normal life and be happy, and I really like object to the idea that you like have to always be climbing, you have to always be reaching for more, um, and like not be happy unless you're doing that. Because like to me, that's like then what's the point, right? Because you never stop. When ambition is a virtue, then stopping is not a virtue. It's the opposite of virtue. It's a bad thing. And like I find that off-putting and also kind of representative, right? That's a common belief that you should always want more and you always need goals. But then, of course, we all know people, we all see people in our lives who live like that, where like they're never happy and they're always waiting for the next thing and think, if they get this job they want, they make more money, blah, 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 that'll make them happy, right? And it never does. It always, the boost they get from those things is very temporary and then they fall into the same patterns because the emotional fabric of their day-to-day lives is like miserable and that doesn't change. your thinking patterns don't change, right? The fact that you ruminate isn't going to change. Nothing changes internally just because your external circumstance changes. And it went in the direction of like identity, basically. The other screenshot he sent was that acceptance is also a sin, right? Because accepting is apparently the same as endorsing. And if you don't like shout at people who are doing something that you disagree with, you're like encouraging them to sin or whatever. And right, obviously we were just making fun of this stuff. But it does like, what's it called? It's kind of a caricature of common beliefs and common attitudes. And like, it kind of got me thinking about, like why people are perpetually unsatisfied and why people valorize the concept, not just of ambition, but of suffering. Um, the idea that like suffering is cleansing or suffering imparts virtue on you um, is a very like hardcore religious element to that still lingers in our society, even among people who aren't religious in any way. And I understand. I grew up in a household. I mean, we weren't religious at all, but there was this idea that it is good to suffer. It is good to live in Spartan conditions. It is good, to not have things and to not, feel good or have the things that make other people feel good. Am I making sense? I don't know. Um, and it sort of plays into a life lived internally. Um, a life where all the drama of that life and everything that matters is happening inside your head. It's your own story, basically, where you live in your own thoughts and you are always thinking about yourself and your own life. And like that's seen as normal at the very least, right? We tend to live in our own dramas and we want to suffer because it gives our lives meaning, right? If you're just going day to day, people feel very unsatisfied with that because there's this expectation that there should be more and that your life should have some sense of purpose or sense of excitement. And so we create that for ourselves in a lot of ways. Or we'll sometimes, project onto fictional characters or whatever, but it's you, right? Um, and it's that fixation on personal drama, on a life where you have dramatic occurrences and ups and downs and go through periods of like devastation and, you know, personal, like emotional turmoil. It's all about you because we believe as a society and are encouraged to believe in the self as the center of life and as the self as having meaning. And, you know, I'm not sure when to pin this. It is a phenomena of the industrial age. I mean, I would say, now I'm not like a historian, I'm not a philosopher, but I guess it really kind of starts with the New Age movement, right? That's the first time where people are intentionally seeking this alternative to traditional religions. And a big alternative that comes up is this idea of self exploration, of spirituality as being about you, finding yourself, who you are. And it's really, it doesn't go anywhere good because there is no, I don't think there is really a you in any sense that's like true. Obviously your body exists as an entity, but it's not separate from anything else, right? There's nothing more that makes you you than like any specific part of your body or, the planet as a whole, the system that you're part of. We draw this line around ourselves as like this very distinct entity that's somehow more distinct than other entities and the parts that make us up and the greater wholes that we're part of, right? I know that sounds kind of woo woo or whatever, but I believe that, and it's there's not really a good reason other than obviously we only can perceive the world through our own conscious experience, and we experience ourselves as sort of the moving entity, right? But it's not really backed up. You as an entity, like why are you the center versus, I don't know, well, the planet also moves on its own, and well, it's part of the solar system that also moves as its own separate part and moves as a cohesive whole. And to me, I don't really believe in that separation. Obviously we experience that separation, but I can't get on board with the almost spiritual aspect of it, of like, because this is how I experience things, it must have a meaning that is deeper and true, right? Beyond me, it's true that, I am important and my life has to have some specific direction. There has to be a storyline. And so, that leads people to latch on to suffering, as like as a source of that, especially in, most of us, in the West, where we live very physically comfortable lives. People who believe that there has to be a meaning and there has to be a story, they're looking for that. They're looking for a plot for that story. And so they fixate on themselves and on this idea of like, oh, who am I? What am I? What does it all mean? Instead of, in my opinion, doesn't really mean anything. You are just whatever your current circumstances make you, and your predispositions and everything else. And that search for meaning is very destructive, and it leads people to crave destruction, to crave that drama. People hate a void. People hate calm, you know, unless something dramatic has just happened, right? Otherwise, we don't call it calm. We call it boredom. And we want to make ourselves interesting and sympathetic characters, right? We third person ourselves, or we create a third person who's kind of a stand in for who we are, who we want to be. And we do that to them, like this imaginary person. And, that's fundamentally identity And the concept of self and the self as we treat it and explore it is the process of third personing ourselves. It's this way in which we construct ourselves into someone interesting or someone we like, right? We don't just exist. We're always writing this story. And maybe, maybe not everyone does that. But, I mean, clearly, when you develop an identity, that's what you're doing, right? And it can be relatively innocent. It can be wanting to look a certain way or whatever, right? That's still third personing yourself. That's still making yourself into somebody who you, from a third person perspective, would like or think is cool. And maybe you wouldn't exactly, but it's closer to what you would like. It's what you like in other people, and you want other people to like that about you or want to see yourself in that positive light. And so, obviously that's how it relates to my personal bugbear of transition. Um, is this process of creation of story and meaning and narrative to something that doesn't inherently have those things. You when we create a certain story about ourselves, the way the brain works and the way memory works is an underlying feeling helps connect different memories, right? So you're always just going to construct a story that reflects how you feel in the moment. You're always going to remember the incidents that support your current outlook and not others, right? You're going to remember, oh, the times you didn't fit in and the times, you hated your body and puberty and, dysphoria, and you're going to create this narrative of, well, this is who I am. And you're encouraged to do that. We're all encouraged to find who we are as though that is a distinct entity that can be captured, even though, we're not always the same person. And we change. Our personalities necessarily don't change much throughout our lives, our general dispositions, but the way we act different around different people and at different times, and we're always shifting around. And there's this tension that exists when we create these narratives between, we want that narrative, we want that story, we want to assign meaning to suffering, and to an extent we want to suffer to procure meaning. And then on the other side, there's a sense of being trapped by it. We're trapped by the identities we create. We're trapped by the stories we tell ourselves, and we want that freedom to escape and just, be whatever, be somebody else somewhere else, right? We all kind of hold this desire to be free from our past and to be free from, all these traits assigned to us in which we assign ourselves. And, to me, the answer is the abandonment of identity and of, self exploration as a virtue unto itself. Um, we all think about ourselves, or, I don't think that's avoidable. It's not totally useless to analyze yourself or why you are the way you are. But once you latch on to those things, it becomes a negative. It becomes worse than useless. It holds you back when you think about things that have happened to you in your childhood and all this stuff where it's, it doesn't necessarily have to still affect you. Obviously we are created by past experiences, but, people will often go through, something traumatic or just a bad time, um, they'll be raised a certain way and they don't like it. And they carry that with them forever when, memory is very malleable and memory does fade. And, things, we want almost things that happen to us to make us who we are, because in a sense, I think a lot of people see bad things that happen to them as almost a blessing, right? When you are not imposing the suffering on yourself, then that burden is removed from you, and now you get the meaning without the trade-off of like you having sort of started it off, right? And we can cling to that. And I found in my life, and I think it generally to be true, that those things often only have the meaning you assign to them. The original pain and the original situation that happens, that fades. But we hold on to that as like a defining event of who we are, because we care about who we are, because we think who we are is important, and we want it to be a stable thing. We want it to be, sort of a rock for us to hold on to. If like, oh well, here is this whole, monolith I've built up of who I am and why I am the way I am. And I think a lot of people do know, that you're chaining yourself to that. And you know that once you've built that up enough, you're not going to be able to move it, and now you're stuck to it. You have it attached, to a chain on your leg, right? You have to drag it around with you, and it makes it harder to become different and to live in a way that's free, and where you can live out more of that fantasy of being someone else by not fixating on, you know the self aspect. It is soothing in an immediate sense to put the self up on this pedestal and assign it these meanings. It makes you feel better at that time to say, this is why I am the way I am. It's because I have this history and these things happen to me, and that's why I act this way and feel this way. I, like I'm transgender, and that's why I don't fit in, and that's why I feel so dysphoric generally, but I'm gonna concentrate that and concentrate it on gender, right? To manage the total sense of discomfort and the general sense of strain and anxiety in my life, and instead of sort of facing the lack of meaning and the fact that, like, you don't know why you are the way you are, and you would probably be kind of the same way even if these things that you focus on had never happened to you, and that, you are just the sex you were born as, and, the fact that you don't fit in doesn't really mean anything, and there's no meaning in your general distress or your specific distress. And, those things can make you feel better for now, but, as you create this storyline for yourself, then you feel like you have to live up to it. So like that soothing, oh well, I have a mood disorder, and that's why I feel this way, and it's out of my control, and it's just something that happens to me through no fault of my own. that's temporarily soothing, but then it never changes, versus, sort of realizing that, well, I behave in a certain way and I indulge my own emotions and I think about my emotions. I place importance on my emotions. Every time I feel anxiety, I think about it and I analyze it and I tell myself, why it's true. And then it builds up and it becomes a bigger and bigger thing until it becomes something that stops me from living the life that I want to lead, or, behaving the way other people are able to behave. And that removal of the realness of it, almost when we revert to these stories, we're taking it out of the now. We're taking things and we're putting them at a distance as part of a broader arc, instead of dealing with the current moment and the current state of things, right? When we give meaning, that makes it easier to cope with the state of things by putting it at that distance and saying, well, it's part of this whole broader thing that I'm going to place more out of my control. And I'm not somebody who believes in us being able to control our lives very much. I question the veracity of free will. I really I don't believe so much in control as an action that can be taken independent of circumstance, if that makes sense. But we do things. We interact with our environment or whatever, and believing that there's this whole big arc behind something that's happening or why you are the way you are, it does hold you back and prevent you from breaking with that pattern. And I don't have an alternative meaning to propose to things because I don't really believe in meaning. I'm not. I don't see that as a bad thing. I I see a lack of meaning and a lack of purpose as an opening. To me, you could take that as, oh well, what's the point? But I see it as the world kind of opens up to me, right? When there's no like goal that I have to meet. There's no point that I have to reach. I can just do whatever. And I don't have to pursue anything. I don't have to always, fight for a plot line. I don't need a conflict. I don't need a climax to my life. I don't need any of that. And I don't necessarily want it. I I enjoy that I don't have a purpose. I enjoy that I can just relax and take things as they come. And I guess that's hard for certain personalities. I mean, I can be a pretty anxious person. I can be high strung under the right circumstances. But, I don't feel like that means that I can't stand to just stay in place. Um, I would almost prefer to just stay in place. I enjoy not having to fulfill an expectation and not always having to be a sympathetic character, which, when you focus on identity and you're focusing on the self, there's a lot of guilt and difficulty around not being someone you like and not being somebody who would be a sympathetic character in a book or in a story. And like that's been one of the big fruits of detransition for me has been in not, I've come to not feel like I need to be a sympathetic character. I don't need to be somebody I would like in the third person. I just am the way that I am, and like, who cares? That's fine. I'm not, I don't need my life to have anything in it that would make me interesting from an outside perspective, such as, dramatic struggles, or, these unfortunate events, and like, oh, woe is me, I suffer from X, Y, and Z, I have gender dysphoria, like all the stuff that we are often drawn to, and in some sense want to take onto ourselves because it imparts that sense of meaning, and it imparts interest, and it imparts a goal. It's something to focus on. And that's just, it's not necessary in life at all. I very much enjoy just existing and just living day to day. And I have some dreams and hopes and everything, but I'm not overly attached to them, and I don't want anything that's special. you know I have very simple life goals, I would say, and that's good enough, and I'm grateful that that's good enough. I don't know where I would be if I was still so attached to this idea, this zooming out on myself and being like, well, I have a temper, gotta fix that, and that makes me a bad person, and then that feeds into emotional distress, and then I label my emotional distress, I pathologize it, and now I have a mental illness, and that's drama and struggle, and like, just making all this stuff up basically to fixate on when it's not needed. And like, obviously that sounds simple and it sounds easy, and if it were such an obvious conclusion, everyone would be doing it, I guess. And I guess it's hard to let go. I think that there's a lot of fear in letting go of these things, and well, what am I gonna do with this emptiness? There's this presumption that the distress, the swirling distress around those things, that will still be there, except now you won't have anything to pin it on, and you'll just constantly be upset and not know what to do. And that can happen as a temporary thing, but the truth is, a lot of those things are fueling distress and are fueling the sense of not being able to settle, and the sense of needing that explanation. Whereas, when the distress isn't there so much, then the explanation isn't needed. That's not to say I don't have negative emotions, or I'm not still kind of a high strung person or whatever, because I am, but I don't really assign meaning to them. And I've gotten better at pinpointing, letting things pass, basically. Um, I mean, I know I hate mindfulness. I know that that's kind of mindfulness or whatever, is letting your emotions pass, like feeling your emotions or whatever, and just letting them go and blah blah blah. And I kind of, anything that's like tainted with like therapy talk and psychiatry, I hate. So like, I'm not gonna call it that. I guess there's some relation there, but also I'm not. I'm not mindful. I don't just sit around and like do what I'm doing. I don't eat a meal and just think about the meal I'm eating. Like I'm always thinking. I'm always going off on mental tangents and whatever. They're just not about me, and they're not telling a story that I wish was me, or a fantasy or something like that. Like my mind has filled that empty space, and I think that is possible for most people. That these things we cling to, we don't need, even though there's a feeling of needing them. And I don't hate fantasy. I think there's very much a place for that. I wish I still had the imagination that I used to, but there needs to be a line. And when you start trying to make your fantasy your reality, I think that's when things start to go south. Um, because that's what happens a lot of the time. Is these are things that are imagined about, read about, thought about, fantasized about, often in a truly third person way. And then you relate so much, you become so emotionally involved in this thing you've created that it becomes you, and you take that on, and you want that storyline to be your storyline because it's so good, it's so involving, it's so stimulating to your emotions, and you're so attached to it, and you want to take that on to yourself. And I don't know where that line is exactly, because fantasy does reflect the sense of adventure and the emotionality that we want. So it does reflect you wanting certain things to an extent, usually. But I could never ask people to give up a fantasy, um, because that's like the closest thing a lot of people have to themselves. So that is difficult, but it is best to acknowledge that bringing these things into reality will not ultimately give you what you're looking for. And you'll find out that even with all these things, you don't become the sympathetic character you want to be. You're still you, and you still have that sense about yourself that you're not really sympathetic, and you're not really likable. So, and that's a very hard letdown. That's a very difficult experience. You know, at the same time, right? These experiences, even though they are in a sense manufactured, they can give you that sense of meaning on a temporary basis. But that almost makes it a harder fall when you eventually sort of lose that. I don't know. That's my ramble for today. Those are the thoughts that I've been having about it. And yeah, maybe I'll get a mic next time. If anybody watched this, as always, thank you. It's a lot to sit through. So if anybody sat through it, I appreciate that. Um, And yeah, that's it.